This is SoundNotion, the weekly podcast for new music and music news. I'm Dave McDonald.
I'm Nate Blayton.
I'm Sam Merciers.
And we are joined this week by pianist and champion of all kinds of new music, Anthony DeMar. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, Anthony.
It's my pleasure.
We have actually talked about you before. A couple of months ago, we had composer Ricardo Lorenz on the show. And he is involved in one of your most recent projects, I guess a project that's still ongoing in a lot of ways, and that is the Liaisons project, which is kind of reinterpretations and reimaginings of the music of Stephen Sondheim. So maybe we should start with you just telling us a little bit about Liaisons.
Sure. Well, it depends how far back you want me to go. I mean...
Well, in case anybody missed our previous show or doesn't know anything about it, let's begin at the beginning.
Okay. Well, about 25 years ago.
Okay.
In the 80s.
At the very beginning.
Yeah, right. I had a thought. Well, I should say that Sondheim's been part of my life since I was very young, because I was trained both as not only as a pianist but as a dancer and in the musical theater. So he's been a big part of my life, and I've always considered him one of the prominent American composers, right up there with Copland and Ives, Gershwin, etc. So in the mid-'80s, I was invited to an arts colony in California, the Gerasi Foundation, which a lot of people probably are familiar with. And I was the first performing artist that they had. They were trying an experiment by having a performing artist. And I brought a whole bunch of projects, one of which was to create this version of one of Sondheim's songs for solo piano. And it was going to be the basis to start the project. I was going to do about 6 or 8 of them myself. But I didn't feel like I had the full chops to do them all myself, so I sort of shelved the idea, played the one piece that I did, which I was somewhat pleased with, at a festival in Buffalo, New York in the summer. And it was curious because Morton Feldman heard it, and he came up to me afterward and he said, it's kind of nice, but, you might, is that the original key? I says, well, I'm not sure. He goes, I think you should take it up a third. And he was right. I just took the whole piece up a third, and it sounded 10 times better. And then after that, it sort of got shelved. And then in the 90s, friends, colleagues, et cetera, were asking me about, whether I was going to do it. And by about 2005, I thought I should probably get on this. But my idea at that point was to cast, as I've been telling people, cast the net wider to be more inclusive of composers from all different genres, not only the contemporary classical, but the jazz world, the opera world, film, theater, avant-garde, et cetera, pop music. And what we wanted to do is with the help of this marvelous, wonderful producer who was one of the fundraisers for the great Flea Theater downtown. It's an off-Broadway theater here in New York. Her name is Rachel Colbert. She helped us get going in terms of fundraising, because as you can well imagine, what is now 36 composers is a major uphill climb on fundraising, especially since we started in 2006, which 2006 and 2007 were great years for fundraising. 2008 and 2009 were horrendous years for fundraising.
Right.
Why ever would that be?
I'm trying to think of what happened.
And so I went to a couple of composer friends, Frederick Rzewski, Paul Moravec, and asked them their opinion. They were very supportive. We have an ongoing joke that Frederick Rzewski was very encouraging, and he says, well, I happen to admire Stephen Sondheim. He's the Schoenberg of the musical theater.
It's interesting.
Yes, I said that was his high compliment. And in any case, what happened from there is the roster at first was going to be about 20 to 25 composers. And after Sondheim heard some of them about a year and a half ago, it increased to about 36. The producer said 36 is a great round number, even though it's huge. But we have, at this point, 30 funded, 26 are completed. And as you know, we just did the New York premiere of the first 17 at Symphony Space in April, which was extremely well received. And there's some criteria for the project as well. I had asked all the composers to keep the pieces between 3 and 10 minutes, to retain the melodic material, because I really wanted them as piano pieces, but they could reimagine in any way that they wanted. I asked them if they could loosely stick to the structure of the song, although they didn't have to. One of the things I did ask was not to deconstruct, although 2 or 3 of them did deconstruct. But those that did that actually did it well. So it's nice to have a few that are within that ilk. It actually helps the variety. But I feel we've been batting 100 on the quality of all the pieces, especially because of the wide range and diversity of the composers, from the old folks like Bill Bolcom and Steve Reich, down to young composers like Gabriel Kahane and Nico Muhly, people like Ricardo Lorenz. We had I wanted a couple of Latin composers. I had Ricardo, of course, from Venezuela, and the Cuban composer Tania Leon. And really kind of mixing it as best as I could within the 36. So that's the basic general gist of it. There's a lot more to say about it, of course, but it's been going along quite well. And Sondheim has been extremely supportive since the beginning. He was actually kind of humbled by the ideas. He said that so many of these great composers were interested in setting his melodies. So he was always very intrigued to see what they were going to do and where this was going to lead, and he seems kind of delighted at this point so far.
That's great. What's his reaction been to the pieces themselves? I think he attended this performance at Symphony Space, right?
We had 2 sort of private fundraising salons, one here at my home and one at the home of one of the donors just this past year. And that's where he heard about 7 pieces the first time, and he heard an additional 6 or 8 the second time. And excuse me, with that, he at first he said he liked them all. Of course, he wouldn't say which he liked better than others. But in the second session, he was a little more observant. He said it's curious that, he said, as a song composer, musically, the material is very concise. It's very condensed, and the songs are then thus expanded because of lyrics. Mm-hmm. Here, one of the missions of the project was to show his genius as a composer, as apart from being a lyricist, which he's been so celebrated as. Sure. So he was curious and intrigued by the fact that how many composers actually took the material and tried to expand it in a way to make obviously you're making a piano piece, an instrumental piece, which is going to be very different from a song, and trying to not only capture musically what he's doing, but also capture the character of what the lyrics are saying and the character of the character who's singing the song. One of the most interesting cases, as I tell people, was David Rakowski. David Rakowski, when I approached him, chose a song that I love very much, but was not on my list because I didn't think it would make a piano piece because it was so strongly character-driven, and that was the song "The Ladies Who Lunch," which was trained by the great Elaine Stritch in the original production of Company. And but that was David's only choice. And using his jazz capacity with his classical capacity, and because Sondheim loves the bossa nova, he was able to really capture the bossa nova that's part of the song and place that in it. So he gets the trajectory of the story of what she's saying, the bitterness, the sadness, as well as the pathos and as a friend of mine has said to me, the good old gal that she seems to be, the character seems to also be. She's not all bitterness and sadness. There's a playfulness about her that all her friends tend to love within the story. And he brings that across as well, musically. So the piece really does communicate that from beginning to end. And I find that several of the composers actually that was their goal. So many of them, this is a curious thing, has said that this is one of the most difficult exercises they've ever done. They said many of them have commented that the songs are already perfect, not only in their writing and in their setting, but in many times in their orchestrations, which, of course, Sondheim doesn't do his own orchestrations. He gives indications, but Jonathan Tunick was his major orchestrator. And like getting Frederick Rzewski to actually choose a piece was one of the major feats. I had to go through 14 songs. Like, well, this one's too perfect. Well, I don't know what I'll do with this one. Well, this one I like too, but I just don't think it'll work as a piano. It was, but a lot of them said they had to go through this tunnel until they saw the light at the end of the tunnel, and then they said they were actually quite pleased with what they did, and they were quite grateful that they went through this challenge because they said it helped better them as a composer.
Yeah, I can absolutely imagine that being being very challenging. As you said, a lot of these songs, you mentioned the Lazy Lunch, are very driven by the character and the singing style. I was listening a little bit this morning to the opening of Sunday in the Park with George with Bernadette Peters, and that's kind of similar to that, very character driven. And a lot of kind of these patter lyric driven songs as well, I think would be really difficult to find ways to maintain that interest without the lyrics and without that over-the-top character.
Exactly. And Sondheim fans Sondheim fans tap into it right away. I mean, they get it right away. Some of the more deconstructed ones, they sort of grimace a little while they're, like, where's the tune? But for those that aren't familiar with Sondheim, I found that the project is a wonderful way to introduce them not only to his melodies but just to the world of what he does, because so many of the shows are so very different from one another, and he can travel between different styles of writing to capture not only the style of the setting or the time period that he's writing in, but also the style of the music. Like shows like A Little Night Music and Sunday in the Park are much more classically oriented. Company and Follies are much more, I don't want to say pop-oriented, but they're much more Broadway-oriented. Company tapping into some of the pop music of the early 70s. Assassins, which is so unusual in itself, taps into them all because he's dealing with a whole series of history of assassinations of presidents, and it's all about the minds of the assassins themselves, each one who comes from such a completely different background. So he tries to capture that as well, I think, musically as well as lyrically, through the lyrics.
To me, this project is very interesting, not just from the perspective of introducing people to Sondheim or explicating Sondheim for people, but from the composer geek side, getting to hear, because all the restrictions and how you tried to get the composers to narrow it down and all these things are what makes it intriguing to me. The Reich example that we're going to hear later is a perfect example. I mean, I don't think I've heard him sound so, carefree and expressive and letting a melody just go like that, but sort of while speaking in his own vernacular. It was very interesting. And we were talking before we came on air about, I'm a huge Bad Plus fan, and I was reading an article about the piece, the project, and I see that you have Ethan Iverson, the pianist from the Bad Plus, did Send in the Clowns, which is, as far as like a tune, probably his best known tune there is.
Right, exactly, right. And the curious thing, just getting back to your Steve Reich comment, one of the coolest things about Steve Reich was that Finishing the Hat was the song that he, was his first, and a few other composers wanted it as well. And now composers were perfectly welcome to set a song that someone else had already chosen, but when they found that someone else chose a song, they went for something else because there was such a wide variety to choose from. But with Steve Reich, he said he had not worked with melody in years, so it was kind of a very freeing experience for him to do that. And I think that Finishing the Hat in the project is one of the pieces that is the perfect example of the melding of two composers. It is definitely a Steve Reich piece, but it sounds just like Sondheim. And there are others that do that, but Steve Reich manages to do it perfectly because that's who he is. I mean, his style is what it is, and it's even the propulsive rhythmic drive of the piece seems to come through. That also captures the emotional character of what George Seurat is singing in the first act when he sings Finishing the Hat.
Right.
There's a kind of celebratory quality about it as well. I'm sorry, what were you going to say?
That's all right. There's a little bit of Skype lag, so when in doubt, we're going to let you talk. So feel free, if you feel like you're talking over us, don't worry about it. I was going to ask, how closely did you work with the composers kind of during the process? Was it kind of they pick a thing and then they go away and come back several months later with this artifact, or was there a lot of back and forth throughout the process?
Well, we would talk first about, everybody got a list of what I called my wish list of songs, although I told them they didn't have to stick to that, because some of them did come forward with songs that they felt strongly about, and I wanted them to, I wanted them, as being part of the project, to feel an affinity of some sort towards his music. I didn't want them to do it just for the gig. And so a lot of them, did have their choices, but some of them did review a lot on the list, and some, of course, liked many of them and had to narrow it down for themselves. But what they would do is after we chose a song, we would talk a little about it, but then they went forward. In the case, again, of so many, I would get a phone call a couple months later saying, this is really kind of difficult. I need to talk to you. In the case of John Musto, which I think is just one of the most amazing cases, is someone who took it, really discernedly went through the songs and came up with one of the most difficult songs, which was Epiphany, that Sweeney Todd sings at one of the most crucial points in Act 1 of Sweeney Todd. He chose this, and he chose some of the other darker music, and he decided to combine them all together. And about 2.5 months into it, 3 months almost, I got a call from him or an email saying he thinks he might have to drop out because this is just too hard, and he doesn't think what he's doing he feels like he's meandering. He said he'd written a few pages, but he wasn't sure if this was going to be the right thing. And based on what I was asking him to do, he just didn't know, and et cetera, et cetera. So I asked him to send me those pages. Well, he sent me the 3 pages he had done, and they were actually quite brilliant. And he was on to something quite wonderful. And I showed it to the producer, and we talked about it. And I wrote him back and said, I really think you're on to something. You should continue with your instinct here. And he said, well, okay. He had to finish up an opera that he was doing out in Santa Fe. And when he came back about 2 months later, he sends me this piece that is just wonderful. It's very dramatic. It encompasses the material. It's a real piano piece. Because he's a real pianist. I mean, he really, he knows. And I thought he was going to be one of the composers that this was going to be simply one of the easiest exercises for anyone to do. And it ended up being the one having the most trouble with it. And again, there were others. Daniel Bernard Roumain called me last summer saying, he was driving his wife at the time. He was driving her crazy by playing the song over and over and over again. And then he said, I found the iso rhythm that I wanted to use, and I found what I was going to do with it, and then it all just basically wrote itself. Mm-hmm. So I think in case of that, there were always conversations, and then we had this ritual whereby when they sent me the piece, I would learn it, and then they would always come over to hear it for the first time, even in its roughest form of my playing. And the producer always wanted to be here too. She wanted to be part of it too for these first sessions, just for all our interaction and all that, to sort of observe and experience it. And those were always fun. I wish we had more video of those sessions because some of them were actually a lot of fun. And then from that point, they just sort of left it to me to, give it its birth, so to speak. Yeah. A funny word, getting back to Ethan Iverson, because you mentioned Ethan. It was curious that Send in the Clowns was on the list from the beginning, and no one chose it for 3 years. Now, Bill Bolton took the opening phrase, and he also took the opening phrase of the song Anyone Can Whistle, and he combined them as a short little fugue. So one is subject, one is counter subject. Mm-hmm. And he combines them as this lovely little sort of night, he calls it a little night fuguetta. And with that
sounds interesting.
That was the only minimal use of the main theme or phrase from Send in the Clowns. And then another composer, Bernadette Speech, also just sort of referenced it because she set the song Liaisons from A Little Night Music, but she also referenced A Little Night Music, Send in the Clowns, but not setting it exactly. So it stayed on the list. And then Ethan wrote, and the heading of his email was, "Can it be true?" And then his first email was, I don't believe it. Send in the Clowns is still free. He says, by all means, I'm going to snatch this one up. So he took it and he did what I think is an extremely unusual setting. He said it was going to be unusual. He reimagined it as being played in a cabaret or a club. And on the stage is a very, if you will, an older pickup band of musicians. And there's this kind of this melody or this introduction that they play that keeps repeating itself through the piece. It keeps coming back. It's a kind of antiphonal thing in the background. And then there's this piano soloist who is off to the side on an old beat-up upright piano that is trying to play the song Send in the Clowns. So what we have is the opening of this band playing this tune that has nothing to do with Send in the Clowns, and then the pianist coming in very quietly trying to play Send in the Clowns, and then he's interrupted 3 more times by the band playing this antiphon, as if the conductor's like sitting there trying to bring back the band as much as each time the pianist has his solo, it's a little bit more, sometimes it's a little bit more unusual in its setting. Sometimes it's more poignant. Sometimes it's funny. So it's always a kind of different setting of the song, but at the same time, still maintaining the pathos of what the song is actually about.
Actually, we were talking before we started recording that you actually are prepared to give us a short excerpt of that piece, and I'm going to go ahead and request it because I'm a huge fan.
He's calling it in.
Okay. What I'm going to do is I'll play you a little part of it, but I'm going to see if I can put the computer. Tell me if this has affected anything.
This is a SoundNotion first.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, that's.
Can you see that?
It's perfect.
Okay. So I'm going to play a first page and a half or so.
Okay.
I'll stop there.
That's great. Thank you so much. That's fantastic.
Such a treat. Thank you.
Yeah.
I think it's great how he makes you want it, because everybody knows that tune.
Yeah.
And when he gives you a little bit of it, it's just not enough. You want more.
He interrupts so abruptly, and then there's two more beautiful settings of it coming up on the next two pages, and then it ends. The pianist actually does end the piece. So
nice. Can't wait to hear that one. I have another quick question about the Reich piece.
Sure.
How is it going to be done live? Because the recording is 2 pianos overdubbed. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. What I did is I recorded myself playing piano 2, which is the pulse piano, and then I accompany myself. I've been doing that live around the country in different settings. What we might do is next year at Symphony Space for the part 2 of the project, which is the remaining pieces, I'll repeat a couple of the pieces, perhaps 2 or 3 that were very popular this year, of which his was one of them. And I think next year we're going to try to do it with 2 pianos live. So you just have a second piano on stage with a guest.
Okay, nice. Well, that is, I couldn't be more excited about hearing all these different composers, especially like the old guard and the young and upcomers, and hear what they do with these pieces of music. And
you said you had Ricardo Lorenz. His is one of the funny settings. I mean, we have a couple of comedy settings too. Ricardo's, he took The Worst Pies in London and A Little Priest from Sweeney Todd, and he sort of, using joropo and merengue and salsa, he called it The Worst Empanadas in London. It's a sort of take on it. He probably told you about that. And another one is an off-Broadway composer named Eric Rockwell, who took You Could Drive a Person Crazy from Company, and he made it in a pastiche setting. He makes it the piece about the page turner from hell. So Turner has to be an actor, obviously.
That
is the interaction between pianist and page turner.
That is so funny, because I have a firm policy that it has to be a dire emergency for me to turn pages,
because I know I would screw it up.
Everybody says that.
If you are an expert page turner, the best thing that can happen is nobody notices you're on stage.
Exactly.
So the only thing you can really do is screw up.
I don't know. I've been complimented many times on my page turning, actually, but only by the pianist and never by the audience.
Well, you're a special case. You're just excellent at everything.
Well, no. No, but I'm interested to hear that one, because that dynamic is really can be pretty tense, but it can also be really like close and involved. It's an interesting thing. Yeah.
So were there any of these that you haven't mentioned yet that you found like really surprising when you got them back? Did I steal your question? Okay. That's all right. Pretend Nate asked that question.
Okay, Nate. Yes, some of the deconstructed ones. Frederick Rzewski sort of deconstructed. He did "I'm Still Here" from Follies, which was Milton Babbitt's original choice. Milton Babbitt, of course, was one of Sondheim's teachers, along with Oscar Hammerstein. And Milton died before he could complete the piece. He had basically just had begun it. So I finally, since Frederick also studied with Babbitt, I thought it would be a nice thing for Frederick to choose the song that Milton was going to do, which was ironic that Milton chose the song that's titled "I'm Still Here," which was at age 93 or 94 when he was going to do it. And he said it, he gave it a completely different title. It's called "The News." It has a little bit of text at the beginning, which is somewhat political. And what he does is he just takes the main motive of the introduction to the song. But what he did is he put a silver lining in. There is an improv, as Rzewski does often. He asks the pianist to improvise halfway through the piece, or in this case, 2/3 of the way through. And I wrote to him and said, "Okay, Frederick, you deconstructed, which I asked you not to do." And he says, "Yes, I know." And I said, "I just want you to know that the improv is going to be the song." He says, "Well, that is exactly what I was hoping you would do." So it's going to be one of those cases where the outer part of the piece goes inward to the song. It starts out, in the ether, and then it's like all the material collects itself and comes down. And then you finally hear the song, and then it disperses itself again out into the universe, if you will. Another one was Tanya Leon's, it's called "Going Gone." It's based on "Good Thing Going" from "Merrily We Roll Along," which is actually a beautiful and lovely ballad. She said it combining kind of 19th century Cuban dance rhythms with in a quasi 12-tone style. It's not 12-tone because it's definitely tonal in its own way. But it's very unusual, and you can hear what she does is she kind of marries Sondheim's harmonies with these Cuban habanero rhythms that seem to sort of dance together, intermingle together, and I found that was very unusual. In terms of being completely surprised, it usually was more delight that what they did, was, I was just really taken with it. Some are extremely difficult. Kenji Bunch's The Demon Barber, which is based on the opening ballad of Sweeney Todd, is very difficult. It's a very direct setting. Jake Heggie's piece called I'm Excited, No You're Not, which is one of the lyrics from A Weekend in the Country, from A Little Night Music. That's also difficult. And there's a few others. Paul Moravec's I Think About You, which is based on the ballad Losing My Mind from Follies. Some of those are challenging, but they're more than worth their work because they're so gratifying to play.
So I don't know if this information is out there and I just haven't found it yet, but as far as like commercial release of these pieces, what's the schedule like for that? Because I'm really anxious.
I have, we record the first 11 last November, and the next sessions are in 2 weeks. Start 2 weeks from tomorrow, I start the next sessions. We'll record 10 more. And then later this year, we'll try to finish up everything. We're shooting for the release date. I mean, we're going to try to shoot for a release date for the Symphony Space concert in March of 2013. But if for any reason it can't, it will be in 2013. And publication will be all in one volume of all 36. And that won't be for another 3 years or so because there's exclusivity on the pieces. Some aren't finished yet. And we actually do want them all in one volume, so that's going to take some doing.
Yeah.
And then getting all the composers, publishers to agree to go to one. Sure.
Well, I'll absolutely be in line waiting for that one to drop at midnight.
Yes, thank you.
at my local, vendor of piano volumes.
Facebook requests for that already, so it's kind of nice to know that people are already so interested.
I predict that a big cross-section of these pieces will become encore favorites for pianists all over the world.
Mm-hmm.
Because, they're all pretty short, and the stuff people know, I think it's going to be just perfect for that capacity. And I can't wait to hear all these composers take on, not just... Like Gabriel Kahan, for instance, I can't imagine him writing a solo piano piece based on what I've heard, and I'm anxious to hear this.
Yeah, his is he took one of the most iconic songs. He took "Being Alive" from Company, and he doesn't. The curious thing is, we had a great discussion about it because he doesn't. If any of you are familiar with Company, have seen it or are familiar with the story, at the end, the main character Bobby, having gone through all these. He has all these close friends who are married couples, and they're trying to encourage him to be married. And he goes through these relationships with these women who he has trouble committing to. And at the end, he sort of sings a song where he wants to feel alive and feel close to someone. And you get the gist that he's going to finally commit to an intimate relationship. But Gabe Kahane said that he didn't trust him. He doesn't trust him. He doesn't trust him. He's going to do this. So he never allows the song breaks out into the big climax at a certain point in his setting. Yeah. But the way Bobby, the character, keeps running away from situations throughout the show, what he does is every time he gives you material, he takes you away from it immediately. Is a metaphor. Mm-hmm. So, and he's also he sort of pays tribute to Gershwin, Bernstein, Copland, and Ligeti along the way. In the way that he sets it. But the theme is there, some of the structure is there, and the way that, how during the show, Bobby's friends are always calling Bobby, 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 baby, Bobby, Bobby, Bobby. Well, he uses that motive throughout. That's always coming back. So there's always this doorbell kind of motif of them calling after him. So it's actually another one that's been well received and very popular with audiences.
It's really interesting to hear you describe all these pieces because you're using a lot of programmatic and very theatrical language to describe these pieces from the theater.
Yeah, I can't help but do that with these, Yeah.
Well, I think of when I think of your playing, one of the things that I think of most readily is a performance that I heard of you playing De Profundis, the Zhevsky piece, which is also very theatrical.
Right.
Are you drawn to this kind of programmatic theatrical work in general?
Yeah, I mean, I always have been. It's it's another facet of what I do. I tend to try to keep as wide a variety. Again, this project, in drawing from composers from all the different genres, is another. I wanted to show another example of keeping a wide range within what I do. Because even from when I began years ago, my programs, I tried to mix styles within the contemporary repertoire as much as I could. Mm-hmm. Both at the time, the downtown and uptown New York composers, from the most academic to the most experimental, mixing John Cage and Elliott Carter and Meredith Monk and Zhevsky and Ligeti, Charles Ives with Debussy. I mean, mixing and matching was always a big part of my aesthetic for my programming. So this is another extension of that. But the theatrical, because of my background in theater, when Zhevsky said he wanted to write De Profundis, he had wanted to set that Oscar Wilde text for years. He was just looking for the right setting, but he said he had always felt that it should be a solo piece. And he felt that this would be a case where the pianist's voice and body could truly be an extension of the instrument, so that they're both giving back to each other constantly. And that's what the piece really is about.
Well, we appreciate anybody who is looking to do something new and keep it fresh. And I think probably piano has its own difficulties in that sense, because it's so set and has been around so long, and it has such a strong rep already. And when you're diving into new music, we're not talking about just the bravery, but oftentimes those are perhaps more challenging or differently challenging than learning a Mozart sonata.
Exactly.
So. Kudos to you for all the hard work.
Well, thanks.
Is there now we know that this is a big project, and obviously you've had your hands full, but is there anything else going on with you that we should know about? This is the plug away section.
Oh no, it's just right now it's getting through getting the recording completed, getting the rest of the pieces learned. I tell people it's always this, I'm not going to call it an uphill battle. It's just that as soon as you start feeling comfortable with a group of the pieces, then there's a new slew that came in that you have to learn. So I always feel like I'm moving up this mountain, and it'd be great to get to the top at some point, and sort of look down on the the whole, each step of the way with each piece. But right now, no, this project remains the basic gist of it. Next year I'll be doing a lot of Zhevsky because of his 75th birthday year in 2013. So I hope to be doing De Profundis more often again. I had done it, I've been doing it for years and years, but there's been a little hiatus over the past couple of years from doing it. So because of this project, but this project will still consume a lot of my time and energy over the next 2 to 3 years, is what I anticipate.
Wow.
Well, I want to go ahead and invite you to be on, I don't know, SoundNotion 214 or whatever it is.
Okay.
I would love to feature some more stuff off this CD when it's finally done and ready to release.
I think it would be great.
And should we move on to the week's news, gentlemen?
Hit it.
Dave, you're going to have to do this because I don't talk about the Detroit
Oh,
Symphony.
man. Sam doesn't talk about any symphonies or operas or anything. He's not into that old stuff. But we haven't talked about the Detroit Symphony for months and months and months. I think we've had a rule, but I'm going to break the rule. They got some really great news this week. They had all kinds of problems in the last couple of seasons, labor issues and money issues and all kinds of other things. And one of their big problems was that they spent a lot of money on a renovation of their space, and the space is beautiful, but they don't really have a lot of money, and so they were in a lot of debt to the banks, real estate debt for their renovations, and a group of their creditors has gotten together and decided to basically forgive $54 million.
It's a lot of bones
in debt.
Do that a few times and sing you're talking about real money.
Yeah, I know, right?
Yeah, right.
And I was thinking as I read this, like, I whoever negotiated this deal, I need to get them to renegotiate my student debt.
Yeah.
Drop in the bucket compared. No big
Right. It should be easy, right? Compared to $54 million, that's like nothing, right? No problem.
Yeah.
Another
So anyway,
orchestra. Go ahead.
Good for the Detroit Orchestra. Good for the Detroit Symphony.
Indeed. Congratulations to the Detroit Symphony. Another orchestra story that Sam won't want to talk about. An Israeli orchestra. They're not saying the Israel Philharmonic, I think, because it's kind of a separate thing. They're all hired individually, but I think a lot of them are. The Israel Philharmonic is playing Wagner in Israel for the first time since. This paper that we're reading says 1938. It's the first time that an Israeli orchestra has played Wagner since 1938. I don't think that's right, because I think just last year we talked about the Israel Chamber Orchestra playing Wagner at Bayreuth. But this might be the first time in a very long time that Wagner has been played by an Israeli orchestra in Israel.
Yeah.
I think it's in Israel, yeah.
And that's a very big deal if you're not familiar with this issue. Wagner was a very vocal anti-Semite. He was the favorite composer of Adolf Hitler. Hitler would use Wagner's music and in his rallies. One of his favorite pieces was Die Meistersinger von Nuremberg. So I mean, it for a long time there's been a major taboo against Jewish musicians playing Wagner.
Right.
And so this is a very cool thing. I don't know if you guys have any specific thoughts on this event.
This is a tough one to talk about, but I will say anecdotally, just to kind of contextualize the way people might take this. My thought is, why bother playing Wagner? Sure, he was great and everything, but I don't think they're not gonna miss out on anything. There's nothing fundamental gonna be missing from Israel if they don't perform Wagner. That's my take. Now, having said that, when I told Megan, my wife, who is Jewish in the sense that her mother was Jewish, so she's Jewish. I say she's Jewish, you know what I mean? But when I told her about this
Send
woman,
your hate mail to Sam Merciers.
So when I told her about the story we were covering this morning, this woman that I know and love for years, who doesn't say anything about being Jewish ever, and doesn't invoke her own ethnic background hardly ever in any kind of meaningful way, had a very pronounced reaction to the idea that they were going to be playing Wagner in Israel.
What was her pronounced reaction?
It involved swear words and that it shouldn't be happening. So I mean, that's just an example. Somebody who, if you ask them about what do you think about Wagner and his anti-Semitism, she might not have much of an opinion normally, but when you say this is happening, it sparked a pretty hard reaction, which I think, it's gonna be a mixed bag of reactions is what they're gonna get. I'm pretty confident.
Can I ask a question? Which piece are they doing? Do you know?
Oh man, there were several pieces mentioned in the story, and I don't remember which one was this particular performance. I want to say it was an excerpt from Siegfried, but don't quote me. Or no, that was the piece. That was the piece that was played at Bayreuth by this orchestra last year.
I think they're doing Tristan.
Oh, they're doing the Tristan Prelude?
I think so.
Oh wow.
Wasn't that it?
Well, there was another issue with the Tristan Prelude that was used as an encore in a performance in I don't remember what orchestra was on tour in Israel a few years ago, and there was like a walkout, and a lot of people were very upset. And in fact, Ariel Sharon even made a statement about it, which tells you what a big deal it was. I do not see, looking over this at the moment. Yeah, so this was a few years ago. The Berlin Staatskapelle was playing under Barenboim and did Tristan in Jerusalem in 2001. Yeah, I'm not sure what the piece is.
Oh, well, anyway.
Just curious.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's a very I think in a lot of ways we should have a way of recognizing the genius of Wagner as a composer and not have that be a representation of his political views, and somehow we should be able to celebrate his musical genius without subscribing to his political views. Is that unreasonable?
I mean,
you do that by not programming it, but listening to it anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Well, how do you listen to it without programming it?
CD.
Well, that's not the same.
I bet you there's 400 recordings of it on Amazon.
You're probably right, but I don't think that's the same
I mean,
thing.
I think it's really hard to separate the music that people make from the person who's making it. I mean,
especially when you're talking about a guy who personally saw a very strong connection between his music and what he felt personally and politically. Mm-hmm. And it seems disingenuous to say we can just separate them and worship and pay homage to the genius and ignore the politics. That's just my opinion.
No, I agree. I agree with that.
Well, anyway, but to avoid hate mail, I think we should move on.
Go for it, Sam.
It's easy to step
again.
on when you're
Sam Mercier's P.O. Box 2456, East Lansing, Michigan. 49 something or I don't remember 482 something.
Don't send your mail there.
Gigantic.
That's not a real P.O. box.
Speaking of gigantic orchestral news,
John Adams.
John Adams, that's the word I was looking for. The Gospel according to the other Mary. Now I have to admit that I have had no knowledge of this other than just kind of knowing that it existed. And listening to him talk about it, it sounds very interesting. It's sort of it's portraying a story in a modern setting and embracing like current political issues and incorporating them into the story.
Yeah.
It's received mixed reviews. A lot of bloggers, and I didn't read all the blog posts about it. But I'm going to reserve judgment until I can hear it. But it sounds very intriguing to me.
Yeah, I've read it described as everything from a masterpiece to a drudgery.
Right.
So there are clearly mixed opinions about it. Mm-hmm. But this is still early days. It seems, reading about it, that he was kind of rushed to get the thing together. And this was kind of an unstaged. It's an oratorio. But this was a very stripped down version of it that was premiered this past weekend with the Los Angeles Philharmonic under Dudamel, and it's going to be premiered in its kind of full version in March of next year, March 2013, and I think that's also in Los Angeles. So follow this, and I think it'll be an interesting thing. It's one of the biggest composers of our time writing on the largest scale. He says it's actually one of the largest scale works that he's ever written. He says the first act is 70-something minutes long.
72 minutes. He said it's one of the biggest musical forms he's ever personally written. The first act.
And John Adams, that's saying something.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
He is not into brevity as a general rule.
He's not into what? Did you say?
Brevity.
No, right. Wow.
So
a short ride on a fast machine is not that short, but it is cool.
But it is fast.
Yeah. It is fast. In other gigantic orchestral news this week, now as a struggling composer, it's kind of like, oh, that's so sweet, and then the other part of me is like, what the hell is this kid doing getting performed by the New York Philharmonic? You guys all feel the same. Deep down.
So what are you talking about, Sam?
The New York Philharmonic has a program. In the Deceptive Cadence blog this week. I mean, you can find articles about this all over the place. Mm-hmm. This is not a brand new program. Composer John Deek, who played bass in the New York Philharmonic for 40 years, and along with the conductor Mare Alsop, have a project where basically they go to take school kids and get them composing.
Elementary school kids. Very young kids.
Elementary school kids, young. The person in question here is 11. And the project culminates for one lucky student in having a piece premiered by the New York Philharmonic. Friend of the show, Daniel Felsenfeld, actually is quoted in this article talking about the most important thing about this class is that you never, ever, ever write their music for them, which I think is a strong point, because I've done a lot of not a lot of work. I've heard a lot of people talk about the work of using composition in an educational setting, and almost without fail, it's composition in that you give them some motives and some rhythms and have them mix them around in sort of a mashup mixed method.
It's like you give them a bunch of boxcars and then they order them to make a train.
Right, and we can have a different show talking about whether or not that's composition and what should we call it, etc. But in this case, I think it's very interesting that they put it all on the kids. So you've got to write everything.
I would love to have Danny back on the show to talk about this, because it's something that I've thought would be interesting, but I would have no idea where to begin working with students that don't read music probably and don't think about music in the same way that you and I do. How to get them to think about constructing something out of nothing. Right. Going back to the Liaisons project, we're going to listen to finishing the hat. The last line of that song is some finishing the hat where there never was a hat. Like, how do you get a kid to think like that? It seems that that would be the real challenge for me. And maybe I'm underestimating 11-year-olds around the world, and I apologize for all the 11-year-olds in our audience.
11-year-olds, send your hate mail to.
Yes.
I have a question. I read that article. What I was confused about is it says that they do not influence them on the writing, but then if they don't know how to write it down, who is guiding the young composer on the Sibelius system to get it out to the orchestra?
Yeah, that was a link that was unclear to me too from the article.
Yeah. Well, I had a different take on that. By teaching him the kid the notation software, you're basically giving them a playback system and different composers have different opinions on the value or merit of this, but you put it in and then you get to hear it. And to me, even if you understand even a very little bit about notation, once you get the gist of how that works, put these lines and dots in, get this stuff back, it's easy for me to imagine in this day and age of a kid figuring out how to make something out of that. Yeah. And while we're never going to know the full story of who helped who with what and who suggested this cadence or anything like that, the piece actually works pretty well and it's got form.
Yeah, and I'm sure with a group like the New York Philharmonic, there's an orchestral librarian that's cleaning everything up.
Yeah. Why don't we hear a quick excerpt from this piece?
Sure. Let me find that here.
This is, what is it called? It's
sorry, it's called Globetrotter. The Globetrotter.
What's the
Milo Poniewozik? I'm not going to try his last name.
Little Milo.
Little Milo. That guy. So I think that's not bad. It's certainly better than anything I could have written when I was 11 or 18 or 20.
I've heard we've all met undergrad composers who want to be composers, but and they want to write something that works in an orchestra that way, and they couldn't put something together that coherent.
Yeah.
So congratulations. Congratulations to Milo. It's a huge thing. And congratulations to the New York Philharmonic and Danny Felsenfeld and all the people involved with that project. That's such a cool thing. I really do want to have Danny on the show again sometime to talk to him about that.
Right. Real quick, adopt a composer. This is a UK program.
So when I read that name, I think of like Sally Struthers in Africa, and there's like starving composers on the side for just $5 a week, for the cost of 2 cups of coffee. You too, and that's what I'm thinking of when you.
We need to make an ad for them. With all of us just looking really sad. Great.
So it's a program called Adopt a Composer, where it pairs what they call up-and-coming composers with a collection of ensembles. And I think they're all choruses, aren't they? Yeah.
It seems like chorus is the focus.
Choir or band. Mm-hmm. And includes the Kew Wind Orchestra, the London Chorus, Walking Symphony Orchestra, Flautismo. I wonder, is that a flute ensemble?
Sounds like it.
Does sound like it.
Well, anyway, it's an interesting program that was suggested. A friend of the show, Carrie Andrew, tweeted about this, and I thought it was an interesting program. And it's still open until the 12th of this month. And we'll have a link on the website if anybody's interested in going to the UK, or from our hundreds of thousands of listeners in the UK. You can still apply for this until the 12th. And I've forgotten for a whole month, but I wanted to mention that friend of the show, Carrie Andrew, and her group Juice Vocal won an independent artist award in the United States for outstanding contemporary ensemble. Nice. And the only reason I wanted to bring it up is because I had a great joke. I wrote her back in the email, "Can't you leave the awards in this country to the hardworking American taxpayers?" So that's going out to Juice Vocal, and I've been waiting for weeks to use that joke.
If you're not following Einstein Beach on Twitter, you should. You can experience the majesty of Einstein on the Beach in 140 character segments. And it's actually kind of neat. They started like Tuesday or Wednesday evening or something like that this past week, and they just finished up about late last night sometime. Yeah. And they were tweeting little chunks of the libretto in order all the way through of Einstein on the Beach, one tweet every 15 minutes or so. And you're encouraged to go seek that out, and if you do the tooting, you retweet some of your favorite lines. I went this morning and retweeted the story about the prematurely air conditioned market with the bathing caps in the beach. So
now I think they should have done this Cage style and released one tweet every 50 years. It would only
I don't think Twitter's going to be around for the second one.
I mean, maybe, but
I don't think so.
Probably in a very different sense.
I haven't even subscribed to this. You know, I'm not following this on Twitter, but when I opened up TweetDeck this morning, it was just that's all I could see anyway. So it's unavoidable, apparently.
Yeah. And this was from, by the way, the people doing this were the Brooklyn Academy of Music. Bam. So congrats to them. Cool project. Bam. Mm-hmm. Doc Watson. Sam, you want to talk about Doc Watson?
Another death in music this week. This week.
This is the obituary section of SoundNotion.
At the end.
I guess you'd call it traditional string band music or the folk revival. I mean, he did a lot of different styles of music. I saw him in 1993 at the Bijou Theater in Knoxville, Tennessee, and he was amazing. Could still chicken pick his ass off. And I
think they call it flat picking, Sam.
Flat picking. The big thing that he brought was it's not you would hear this string band music before him and his influence, and you hear these very active melodic lines in the fiddle and perhaps the banjo, and the guitar had a tendency to just chug along sort of like a rhythm instrument. And Doc Watson didn't like that, so he figured out how to play fast and clean, basically, and started playing those fiddle lines on guitar, and hence we have hundreds of guitar players. You know, he's like the Eddie Van Halen of the flat picking world. Everybody can do what he did because it was so awesome they couldn't help themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So we will miss Doc Watson, a great innovator and great musician, influenced a lot of people.
So we're running a little long, but I think it's time.
Pick of the week. And next week that will have genuine reverb and stuff on it because my office will be completely set up.
You've said that now 3 weeks in a row.
Oh, it's done basically. It's just it's a construction zone, so it's not safe to be.
Yet
in
you're
there.
still joining us from your living room, so I don't believe you. So our pick of the week this week is from our guest Anthony DeMar. Tony, thank you so much for sharing this recording. This is we talked about it a little bit at the top of the show. This is the piece by Steve Reich, finishing the hat, and it's called Finishing the Hat, right?
Finishing the Hat.
So I don't know if there's anything that you wanna say to set this up before we listen to it.
Well, just what I said earlier. It's that this is one of those perfect meldings of Steve Reich's style with Sondheim's melodic material, and it sounds like both of them exactly. And it's originally for 2 pianos. He originally was going to conceive of it for 4 tracks, but he settled on 2. So this is me. I've recorded piano 2, and I'm playing. Well, no, in this case, I've recorded both. Because for live performances, I play piano 1 with live with piano 2 recorded. And that's basically it.
All right.
Finishing the Hat from Sunday in the Park with George.
An excerpt from not Sunday in the Park with George. That was an excerpt from Finishing the Hat, performed by our guest Tony DeMar. Pieces by Steve Reich based on a piece of the same title from Sunday in the Park with George by Stephen Sondheim. I know you guys couldn't hear that at the beginning. Sorry, we didn't have the mixer set right there. Apologize for that. But it's a really great piece, and we said this earlier. It sounds so much like the original, but there's also the rhythmic drive of Steve Reich underneath it the whole time. So it's really interesting to hear a piece. Reich we usually think of as these huge pieces, but this is such a more the size of a song from a musical. It's more the size of the original song. So it's a really interesting kind of combination of those two ideas.
Yeah, I found it because if I'm right, I played this musical. I played one of the Multi Woodwind books in college, and I didn't remember the song, but I went and listened to it, and he's sort of lamenting the fact that his art alienates him from the people that he wants to be close to, and I really feel like, especially the way it ends, how it's sort of pounding the melody way up high, and that's kind of where it ends, like. There's not a lot of resolution. It's just like, I keep doing it and doing it and doing it, and nothing changes, and he's still sad at the end.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, it's set up in the show by he's supposed to take his girlfriend Dot to the Follies, and he gets so involved in completing the hat that's on top of her head in the painting that he forgets, and they have a huge argument, and she walks out, and he says he has to finish the hat, and then he laments that. This is his life.
Right.
This is what he has to do. So
I think it's a very composerly message.
Yeah.
You're going to have to find some solace in your art and art alone because you're not going to get rich. Well, I thought it was just beautiful. A great reworking of that piece, and I can't wait to hear the rest.
Yeah. And I really think it's one of the it's nice for a short piece because it really does. Even for a short piece, I think reward repeat listenings.
Mm-hmm.
The first time I heard it, all I heard was Finishing the Hat. My first thought was, well, that was just kind of a transcription. And then I listened to it, and the more I listen to it, the more I hear the Reich part of it. So I guess the first time, the main thing I heard was the Sondheim part, and the more I listened to it, the more that balance kind of shifts towards Reich a little bit.
Right. Yeah, I've probably listened to it 6 times now, and I've gotten to the point where I'm starting to try and figure out what processes are going on in the middle when you hear the melody repeated and juxtaposed a lot. You got to think there's something going on there, and your composer brain is hard to let go of trying to find the process in a Reich piece.
It's tricky to play the piano 1 part. Well, it's tricky to play both parts, but because the meters are always changing. But piano 1 is hard because he's got a lot of double moving sixths between the hands, which is it feels like mallet writing for the hands at the piano. I feel like if I could play this easier if I had 2 mallets in each hand.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, well, I don't think that comes as a surprise considering Reich's background and his output. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So anyway, Tony, keep us informed how it's going, and I'm serious. In however long it takes, I want to
when the CD comes out. Absolutely.
So we can feature the CD.
Sure, I'd love to do that. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, and also if you have any performances of these pieces that are, let us know.
Let us know.
The website will be updated this coming week. It's been one of the last things we have to do. There's a huge over thing we're doing on the website. It'll have more audio clips. It'll have some video clips, and my whole schedule. Right now, the schedule doesn't show anything new, but everything for next season and the season after will be posted, and that'll be added to more regularly.
Great.
All right. Well, when that gets updated, we'll actually throw an extra link on the site to remind people.
Great. Thanks so much.
So if you want to find that, we'll have links to all of these things on our site, soundnotion.tv/SN. You can also check out Anthony's site. We've been, for people that are watching the video version of the show, his website has been up several times, anthonydemar.com. So you can go there to find anything you need about Anthony and his upcoming performances of this work. To read about any of the other stories that we talked about, again, our site, soundnotion.tv/SN. You can also leave a comment. We've been sharing our opinions throughout the show. If you want to send us your hate mail about the way I treated 11-year-olds or the way Sam treated various ethnic groups, soundnotion.tv/SN is the place to do that. You can also connect with us on Facebook and Twitter. We're at SoundNotion as kind of a group on Twitter. We're also all individually on Twitter as well. This show and all our shows are available in the iTunes store, so be sure to go there and subscribe for free and catch every episode. Download it automatically in iTunes. SoundNotion's introduction includes music by Patrick Gullo and video by Tyler Lepp. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you back next week.